If I asked you to name a game where you walk around dimly lit hallways, ration your health, collect artifacts, and push a lot of buttons, you probably wouldn't name a Star Trek title. Unless, of course, you had played Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The Fallen. Welcome, my name's Azadash, and welcome to another Star Trek game retrospective video. Released in the year 2000 and developed by The Collective, The Fallen was released about a year after the final season of Deep Space Nine aired, and marked the third video game adaptation of the popular television series, following up Crossroads of Time and Harbinger. There would be another final game based on the DS9 license in 2001, entitled Dominion Wars, but this was more of a space combat game as opposed to the more adventure-like previous games. The Fallen was also, by all accounts, the best reviewed DS9 game, with it still holding an impressive 82 Metacritic rating today. Now, when I first read this before beginning my playthrough, I thought, great, I've had to endure some less than brilliant games recently. A really good game based on a franchise I love should be a welcome change. At least that's what I thought. Now, if you enjoyed The Fallen, I am not here to tell you that you are wrong or that you should not enjoy it. I mean, clearly, with such a high Metacritic rating, there are many people who believe this is not only a good game, but a great game. I am, however, not one of those people. Regular viewers of the channel will know that I generally try and look for the positives in things. I mean, I even found nice things to say about Daikatana, but in the case of The Fallen, I honestly found myself wondering exactly how much of the game the people who reviewed it played and what understanding of the overall Star Trek franchise they had. As a fairly keen Star Trek fan, of course I am going to critique things like story more than your average punter. But even if I gave story a free pass, there's still a lot I have to say about the game. Now, I am going to be as objective as I can. I'm going to point out what I think is good and what I think is not, and leave it up to you as the viewer to make up your own mind. The version we're playing here is the PC version. There was a Mac version released a year after the PC one, but for all intents and purposes, it is the same game. I'm using a widescreen patch which works really well, and I'll drop a link to this in the description. Compatibility is pretty good on a modern Windows 11 PC. However, there are rare times when the frame rate will completely bottom out from a locked 60 to the mid-teens. Now, this doesn't happen in particularly visually demanding areas, rather just completely at random, although I will say in my entire playthrough, this only occurred a handful of times and didn't really detract from the overall experience. Story is interesting to say the least. There are three playable characters, Sisko, Kira, and Worf. Sisko's campaign is the longest and most comprehensive, whereas both Kira's and Worf fill in additional plot points. On the surface, this sounds good, but the challenge is, when you're experiencing the Sisko playthrough, which by all accounts is the one you should start with, there are sections of story which feel out of place due to the missing context from the other characters. I think a single continuous campaign with switching perspectives might have worked better here, but this could be argued as personal preference. The actual storyline requires some Star Trek knowledge to digest, and I would say that someone who is not at least vaguely familiar with DS9 would struggle to make heads or tails of it. Basically, the Cardassians are trying to collect a set of orbs from around the galaxy to put them together and create a super weapon and go about releasing the Par-Wraiths from the fire caves. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because it is. In fact, the core theme of releasing the Par-Wraiths from the fire caves was one of the biggest plot points of the entire 7th season of DS9. Yes, it's an interesting story, but it's one that any fan would already know, given the television series ended its run a full year before the release of the game. I don't know what the process was over at Paramount in signing off of licensed stories in games, but I can say in the case of The Fallen, the process has not aged well. There are also elements of the story, particularly the Kira campaign, which just defy belief of how the character in the television series would behave. Oh, and on the topic of overall narration, there are some strange passages of dialogue. Take the first Kira mission. You're at a monastery with a monk where mercenaries are trying to kill everyone. Kira comes up with a plan to get everyone to safety, which the monk agrees with.
Keelan, Does the monastery have a subspace transceiver?
Affirmative. The communication array is mounted on the tower on the opposite side of the bridge.
If we realign the array's transceiver coils, we may be able to send a focused subspace signal to the runabout and beam everyone to safety.
After completing a set of tasks to help get everyone to safety, the monk reappears and asks why she's leaving so soon.
Leaving so soon, Nerys?
Keelan. Yes, I'm leaving. And I won't be back. No offense.
Hang on, there's a literal massacre happening here right now, and you're asking why I'm leaving so soon? Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's grab a hand phaser, check out tricorder, and head back to the year 2000 to remember The Fallen. Technically, The Fallen is probably best described as a third-person shooter. However, there are many segments which fit the criteria for something closer to a survival horror game. Now, two essentials for any third-person game are camera and control. And look, when I first played through the tutorial, I thought, wow, camera and control are great. I have great control over my character and I can see exactly where I need to go. This is great stuff. And then I started the actual campaign. Now, those with a keen eye will notice a few changes between the tutorial and the actual campaign. The tutorial is comprised of large open spaces, whereas a good chunk of the game is comprised of confined spaces. The tutorial features platforming from perfectly straight ledges to other perfectly straight ledges. Most of the platforming in the game includes angled ledges. The tutorial doesn't feature swimming. The game features enough swimming to make you feel like a submarine. I could go on here, but these are the most egregious examples. Firstly, the camera positioning is fine in large environments. You can see exactly where you need to go and generally have good environmental awareness. However, in more confined spaces, due to the fact the camera zooms when you approach solid objects and doesn't really have a concept of transparency, you often struggle for situational awareness. On the topic of platforming, The Fallen is from that unfortunate era of gaming where if you didn't jump on the perfect angle, your character wouldn't grab onto a ledge but instead fall. When you combine this with some of the darker areas of levels, it's really easy to misjudge the platforming sections. Maybe this is a skill issue, I'm open to consider that, but from a quality of life point of view, it severely misses the mark. Now, swimming alone isn't terrible, it's actually pretty good. The issue is getting out of the water, where both the camera and straight ledge issue fight the player to get out. You kind of need to angle the camera down, if that makes sense, which feels counterintuitive. There's also two speeds of movement in the game. Running, which is by default what you do and are able to use your weapon with, or sneaking, which moves you at a snail's pace without the ability to use any weapon. This creates combat issues too, which I'm going to get to shortly. Oh, and the game has a very annoying mechanic where the vast majority of doors don't have sensors on them, which means instead of walking through the door, you need to walk up to the control panel, activate it, and then walk through the door. Now, there are doors which require certain keycards, of which you will be collecting a lot through your adventure, and I wouldn't mind if only keycard sealed doors required this process, but we're talking about half of the game's doors using this mechanic, which requires you to walk to the panel and interact with it, as opposed to the door just opening. Now, anyone who's played games know that if camera and control are dicey, there's a good chance there are going to be issues with combat, and that's absolutely the case here. Combat tries to do a lot of cool things, like having you interact with your tricorder to find shield modulations before firing. However, while there are some good ideas here, both the basics and the execution of the cool ideas fall well short of where they should be. Firstly, for about a quarter of the game, your main weapon is a rechargeable hand phaser. Great, you don't have to worry about ammo. This should be able to carry you well. Only one full discharge of the phaser is only able to eliminate one enemy, meaning if you are in an area where there are two or more enemies, which is often, you need to engage, circle strafe while your phaser recharges, and then re-engage. Did I mention this thing recharges at a snail's pace too? There are other weapons which are all much better, including a sniper rifle-like weapon, but there are certainly large stretches of the game where you're going to need to rely on the phaser. I don't have a problem with the concept here, but there needed to be some type of payoff for strategy, like sneaking up on them or something. But there isn't. I said before you basically have two speeds, run or walk without a weapon, and where this really impacts combat is going through doors. If you walk through a door, there could be an enemy who will get an easy shot on you without the ability for you to easily return fire. If you run through a door, the same thing will happen, only you'll have to take a moment to reorient yourself towards the enemy. Oh, and if you're thinking you can use your tricorder to pre-scan rooms, the game makes extensive use of invisible markers in the level to trip beam-ins of enemies, rendering your tricorder largely redundant for this purpose. There are also situations in which platforming or reaching a new area will virtually require you to take damage due to enemy spawning, again contributing to the overall frustration. And on the topic of enemies, look, I'm from Australia. I'm used to everything in the environment trying to kill me, but the amount of spiders, random electrical arcs, flying things, and other random enemies within the levels feels more like a mechanic to slow down the pace of the game and inflate the difficulty, as opposed to actually fit within the environment you're in. Oh, and of course, how can I forget my personal favourite enemy, those that rush at you and explode? Also, I'm no expert on Federation lore, but am I the only one who thinks it's a little unusual that Cisco starts one of the levels equipped with virtual landmines? Yeah, I'm not sure that echoes the Federation's values, but I guess it was a time of war after all. Outside of combat, there are a few puzzle mechanics, which often involve fetching items to unlock doors or areas. The problem is, these are all the same. Regardless of the level or environment, you'll typically need to find a command key, a utility key, or an artifact. That's it. And what's odd is that sometimes these items are so close to the required use point that you really have to wonder why they required these items to progress. Where the game does shine is in the large open areas, and there's quite a few excellent set pieces, such as a fight on a large saucer section of a downed starship, and this is really where the Fallen shines the brightest. There's also quite a lot of detail put into the game environments. For example, if you look out the window in one of the levels, you'll see the Defiant engaged in combat with another ship. These are small but noticeable touches. Presentation has its ups and downs. The overall graphical quality is very good. There's a good level of detail here. Cutscenes are well animated, and the art style has aged very well. Menu systems are also well done. You can customize virtually everything to your liking and easily keep track of your save games. Where the presentation falls down is in the glitches. Now, apart from some fairly innocuous clipping issues, I had a few unusual scenarios. The first was where I found an elevator that just refused to go up, to the stage where I thought I was actually missing an objective or something to cause it to go up. I spent a good 5 minutes moving around and standing in different places on the elevator until it finally decided to go up. Another time, I almost softlocked the game by getting Cisco stuck in some type of moonwalk in a mining cart, requiring some intense button mashing to get him out. I did have some minor performance issues as well, as I pointed out earlier, but I'm going to put that down to modern hardware issues as opposed to a game logic issue. Overall, the presentation is relatively strong, however the glitches certainly bring it down in terms of overall experience. Sound design gives you a very strong initial impression, with the game featuring a very memorable orchestral piece playing over the main menu. Effects are also good, with everything sounding as it should. However, the voice acting is mixed. Literally, it's mixed because some of the actors are their television counterparts and others are not. The irony here is that it feels really jarring going from a television actor voicing a line to a regular voice actor. I almost think they should have committed to fully going one way or another, but take a listen and decide for yourself.
Mr. Worf, does that look like an accident to you?
Negative. Its hull was breached from the outside. It was attacked.
Captain, I'm picking up faint life signs aboard the Bajoran ship, but they aren't answering our hails.
O'Brien, start beaming the survivors to sickbay.
We can't get a transporter lock, sir. Too much interference from the tachyon particles in the belt and the Eichner radiation leaking from their fusion core.
Now, I realise I have critiqued a lot of things about this game, and maybe I've got it all wrong and I am overreacting. It's not often that I really need to push myself to finish a game that I'm reviewing, especially a Star Trek one, as I have a love for the source material. However, The Fallen, like its own default phaser, took a lot of energy to keep going. There are times everything comes together for the game, and you can have a lot of fun. But in my experience, this didn't happen nearly enough to overlook all of the times that it doesn't. Die-hard Star Trek fans will likely still find something here to enjoy, but for the more casual player, it's a difficult recommendation. There are some things which I think could be quick wins in terms of improvement. Simple things like changing the recharge rate of the phaser or allowing you to have a weapon drawn when sneaking. However, it's likely going to be a tall ask for the community to make these changes in the face of other more accomplished Star Trek titles being available. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.